Okay, today we're going to look at your booklet B 2019 PSLE. Okay, now we're skipping the first question, okay, because that is on adaptation. We're moving on to B. Explain how insect P sitting on flower Q is a disadvantage. So once again, you must learn how to annotate. Okay, in the question stem itself, it provides you with a lot of hints and clues and tells you what your answer should be. So over here, question 29, it tells you that it shows insect P and flower Q. Insect P feeds on bees. Okay, so ask yourself, when will you ever see these two things, bees and flowers? So I hope you all remember that bees and flowers, you probably only see it under the topic or under the chapter of repro in plants. Okay, and they come as a fact that they are actually pollinators. So your pollinators is in charge of helping with the transfer of pollen grains from your anther to your stigma. So from this, right, you already know what is the concept or the or the topic that's being tested. So it narrows down straight away. You will know is repro in plants. Then what should come to your mind is male and female parts of your plants. So then we jump back into the question. Okay. Now explain how insect P sitting on the flower Q is disadvantage to flower Q. So remember, this topic is on repro. So when you're given a diagram, take a look at the diagram. Now, there are two ways of answering this. The first way, which is the more obvious one, okay, which has got to do with interaction, living together, okay, interactions, okay, whereby you need to actually talk about how your insect feeds on the pollinators. Okay, so because they feed on the pollinators, there's no pollinators left to pollinate the flowers. And so the chances of pollination actually drops. It's not zero hot. It's not cannot. It's just that the chances of being pollinated is lesser. Okay? Now the second one, alright, is more of a cannot because it's blocked. Okay? Now the second one has got to do more with repro in plants, the way you answer it. Why? Because if you take a look at this insect, it's literally sitting on the flower where your female and your male reproductive parts are. So it's physically blocking, if you realize that. Right? It's physically blocking all the reproduction parts. Okay? So you have to say that insect P sits on the flower Q and blocks the reproductive parts of the flower. So this is actually the mechanism part. This will give you half a mark. And then after that, with mechanism, okay, you want to know what is the consequence. So the consequence would be hence rate of pollination, okay, will be prevented. Or hence pollination would be prevented. Okay? So I guess it's also, you can also say that one of the annotation that you should make is disadvantage. So maybe for this, you should think for yourself, what is it that is non-beneficial to the plant in this case, which is not being able to pollinate, correct? Alright, so by doing annotation, you actually know what are the demands of the question. So when it comes to diagrams, please take a look. They are really there to help you. Ask yourself, how? What is this insect doing? Okay? Moving on. Next. Okay, the wings of a butterfly S have upper sides and undersides. Each side may be dull or bright in color. So upper sides, lower sides, dull, bright. Okay. Sally observed 50 butterflies S for each type of wing color K, L, M, and N. For each type, she counted the number of butterflies that attracted a male. Now, whenever you undergo a question, it is good for you to identify, especially when it's an experimental type of question like this. You must always identify, okay, what is the topic about, as well as what is your measured variable and what is your changed variable. This will help you greatly. So if you take a look at it, okay, she counted. So this must be the measured variable of this experiment. Okay, and then and then after that you have your change variable, is the type of wing color. This is your change variable. Now then the question goes on to explain that Xiaoli thinks that the wing color of the upper side would affect the ability of butterfly S to attract a mate. Which two types of color K, L, M, and N did she use to arrive at this conclusion? Explain your answer. So this question is actually disguised as a fair test question. Okay, I just want to do a very quick revision, which is very important. Now, there are three types of factors in an experiment that are very similar. Most students cannot differentiate between these three types of questions. They are namely your fair test, your fair test, reliability, and accuracy. These three, what are they asking for? In fair test, we are concerned with the change variable, or rather one only, having only one change variable. In reliability, we are concerned with having the same results, being able to obtain the same results. And lastly, accuracy, we are concerned with the measured variable. So you ask yourself, out of these three, what is it about? Now, fair test is talking about in any experiment, you cannot have more than one change variable. The minute you have more than one change variable, okay, it becomes wrong already. The experiment is unfair. Reliability means that can you repeat the experiment and get very similar results. In fact, the best is if I repeat it 10 times and I take the average, the results are all the same. So in fact, don't even take average because all the same, okay? That is reliability. Means that, okay, the results are reliable. There's very little human errors in it. Accuracy's got to do with obtaining the measured variable. So for example, if you remember, you have this mosquito counting question in 2020 PSLE paper, where you are required to count the number of mosquitoes. And then they said they use a white shirt. How will white shirt increase accuracy? That's because the child will be able to see the mosquito clearly because it's black. So there's contrast between the mosquito and the shirt. She was able to count it accurately, see the mosquito easily and count it. Okay, so that will actually increase the accuracy of obtaining your measured variable. So in exam, it's very important that you are able to see this. So this question is actually disguised as a fair test because they're asking you, okay, which two, okay, should she use such that there is the one correct change variable while the rest of the variables remain the same. Okay, so in this case there are two answers. Because the change variable is actually upper side, so the bottom part of the wing, right, must be the same. So there are two plausible answers which I'm going to quote it. Is either you have K, whereby you have a dull upper and bright under, together with M, a bright under but a bright upper as well. So can you see that this is different, but this is the same? So if you use this two, there's only one change variable, which is the upper side. The underside remains unchanged. Similarly, you could have chose your answer as L and M. Then you will have to explain that in this case, the upper side is actually different and the underside is the same. Okay, just that the dull and bright actually swap. Okay, so how would my answer look like? So I can say that K and M. Okay, there is only one change variable, which is the color of the upper side of the wing. While the color of the underside of the wing remains unchanged or remains constant. Okay? Alright, moving on. We are skipping the next question. Okay, so this is a question that is supposedly to be living together. However, we are going through it because there are factors of this question that could be skills from this question that could be transferred to other questions. Okay, this question is also related to life cycle and reproduction in animals. Okay, so let's take a look at it. So they tell you that bird pee is a pest found in large numbers where people live. The droppings of blood of bird pee may carry diseases that are harmful to people. Then they tell you that scientists introduce a substance S to the food. Okay, this graph shows the changes in number of the births and deaths of bird pee after substance S was introduced. Okay, first question. State how many months after the introduction of substance S did the number of birds of pee start to decrease. So the key word here is start, after it's being introduced. So if you take a look at here, it was introduced over here. And it only started to decrease after 6 months. This is very straightforward. Not after 12 months. Some of you actually put 12 months, which is not correct. Okay, why? At 12 months, it just means that rate of death and rate of birth is equal. Okay, is equal. So before that, as you can see, rate of birth is actually higher than rate of death, which means that the birds are actually growing in population because birth rate exceeds death rates. But once it reaches here, they are equal. Okay? So answer 6. This is very straightforward. Now, this is the question that I would like to spend a little bit more time on. Using information from the graph. This is actually very important. Okay? Whenever you're given a graph, you have to quote data from the graph. You have to quote evidence from the graph. Okay? Suggest a possible way that substance S acted on P. Explain your answer. So this question is on generating possibilities. Alright? So as long as it's logical, we will accept it within the tested topic. So we know that in this topic, you see the word birth. This would actually hint you that probably, perhaps life cycle or reproduction, okay, the topic of reproduction could be the topic. So you need to ask yourself, okay, you look at this graph, how many trends are there? So all in all, there are actually 2 trends. The first trend is on your death, which is highlighted in, your birth, which is highlighted in green. And then you have your death, which I'm going to highlight in orange. So then after that, you need to ask yourself, what is the most outstanding part about the trends? So all in all, right, there are 2 general trends. The first one is that your death remains relatively constant, unchanged, right? Same. Whereas your birth is decreasing. So because the question already gave you a hint, you have to use information. So somewhere in my answer, definitely I have to talk about the birth rate decreasing and the death rate remaining constant. Okay? And then now I have to think of a possibility that could result in such a scenario whereby the birth rate is actually what could have happened to bird P. So basically bird P, if you take a look at it, actually the birth rate is decreasing, right? That's the main thing. So ask yourself, under the topic of repro and life cycle, right? Okay, which part of it will probably affect birth rate? So that would be the part on the laying of the eggs. You can talk about the laying of the eggs, or you can talk about the fertilization, or and in order for fertilization to happen, you can talk about maybe substance X affected the sex cells, either the female or the male sex cells of the birds. You can talk about it maybe prevents the birds from laying the eggs. Okay, it reduces the fertility of the birds. So there must be some form of a mechanism, and because of that, less birds, okay, will be given, will actually hatch. When you think about it, having a successful hatchling does not equals, okay, being pregnant does not equals to giving birth. Similarly, when you have a bird, okay, that has successfully mated, maybe the eggs, there's something wrong with the eggs itself, it cannot hatch. Okay? That is something that you need to be aware of. So how would the answer look like? Okay? So you would want to say that substance S could prevent the birds from laying eggs. Right? So without eggs, there can be no births. Hence, the birth rate starts to decrease. At the same time, death rate of the birds remain constant, causing the population to decrease. Now, some of you may be thinking, why are we mentioning death rate over here? So, because the overall effect of the effect on the birds is that the whole population will decrease. Now, you imagine if, let's say, your birth rate drops, but your death rate remains constant, didn't drop. So, obviously, over time, the overall population will start to drop. You have to mention death rate remain constant because we cannot assume that the death rate won't drop. So you see, if you flip it in another scenario whereby birth rate drop, death rate also drop, population won't drop, right? Because it's like saying that the number of birds is given has hatched, okay, decreases, but the death rate also decreases. So in a way, the general population doesn't decrease. But if death rate remains the same or high, okay, but your birth rate drops, so obviously the birth rate is not fast enough to replace the death rates of the birds, overall population will drop. Okay, all right. Okay, we're skipping B. Okay, this question, all right, it's a question whereby a lot of you got it wrong. Not because you didn't know the answer, but you didn't answer the question. Let me explain to you why. Okay, so let's analyze the question first. Polar bears are mammals. They swim in the sea to look for food. After some time, they need to get out of water to breathe and rest on the ice before entering the water again. Okay? So this topic, based on what I'm seeing, like breathe, okay, mammals, it could be an integration between classification, okay, under diversity of animals and your whereby you have your different categories such as mammals, reptiles, fish, as well as respiration, the respiratory system. Okay, so let's take a look at it. Give a reason why polar bears cannot breathe underwater. Most of you actually gave the answer as polar bears have lungs to take in oxygen. Okay, now this cannot be true. Okay, I mean it's true, but it's not the answer that they're looking for. Because having lungs doesn't explain to the examiner why it cannot breathe underwater. The keyword here is breathe underwater. So you need to annotate, you need to ask yourself, what is needed to breathe underwater? So your answer would be gills. Why? Because your gills is able to absorb dissolved oxygen. Okay? So when you annotate it like that, you are able to actually, okay, understand what is the demand of this question. It's just like if you tell me it's got lungs, okay, flip it another question. I asked you, why did the little boy not buy the expensive toy? You answer me, because the little boy does not have a job. But he not having a job does not necessarily means that he has no money. Because the reason why he's not able to buy the expensive toy was because he has no money, not because he doesn't have a job. Yes, well, having a job may be correlated to having money, okay? But that's not the direct answer. So you need to tell me what is needed to breathe underwater, and the polar bear doesn't have it. So the answer would look something like, okay, the bear does not have does not have gills to absorb dissolved oxygen in the water. So remember, it's always structure must link with function. Okay, state two forces acting on the bear as it walks on ice. This one is, once again, you need to be careful. Please, it's forces, not energy. Alright, so there are people who tell me things like gravitational potential energy. Okay, this is a very common mistake. So make sure you annotate it. So it's gravity and friction. Okay, because without friction, there is no grip on the floor, and you'll never be able to put one foot forward, okay, in front of another. Alright, we're crossing out C. Next. Alright, for the next question, okay, very quickly, Ravi wanted to investigate the conditions needed for leaf growth using 3 types of soil. Okay, so basically 4 types of identical plants were placed in the same area within a garden. The diagram shows the 4 pots of plants after 2 weeks. So when you look at it, right, okay, the change variable, okay, is supposedly to be the types of soil. This is your change variable. And the measured variable is basically the size of the plant. Alright? So then they ask you, state which pots must be compared to conclude the effects of each variable on plant growth. So remember, this is actually talking about fair test. It's a fair test question when they ask you to always think about what should be compared with what. It's a fair test question, right? Whereby there should only be one change variable, okay, and the rest needs to remain constant. And you have to identify what is the change variable. So the change variable for the first one in this case is type of soil. So obviously, if you were to look over here, there are 3 types of soil. So I definitely do not need 2 garden soil, okay? So basically the answer is P, R, and S. Why? Can you see the type of soil is different? You have garden soil, sandy soil, and clayey soil. Then the availability of water is the same for all 3. It cannot be Q. Q is wrong because, okay, you're not giving Q water. You are introducing an additional change variable besides, okay? You're introducing another change variable besides the type of soil if you select Q as well. So therefore the answer should be P, R, and S. The next one, availability of water. Once again, change variable can only be one. This time round is availability of water. So obviously the one with the no must be selected because the rest are all yes one. So therefore, Q definitely needs to be in the answer. Then which one do you want to compare with Q? So if you look at Q, remember there's only one change variable allowed, and it's water. So it has to be garden soil as well. So the answer is very straightforward, P, and nothing else. Next, Ravi conducted a second experiment. So this is the second experiment. Make sure you note it, okay? To find out how the amount of fertilizer affects leaf growth. So amount of fertilizer in this case is your change variable, and leaf growth is your measured variable. Make sure you annotate. You're going to deal with a lot of experimental questions. So how do you help yourself? Annotate. It will really help you. He conducted a fair test planting the same number of plants in 5 big pots. Okay? The pots are all filled with garden soil. Highlight that. Okay? The results of it are shown. So they ask, what can Ravi conclude about the effect of fertilizers on leaf growth? So once again, you're given data. So remember I told you, when they give you a table or graph, you have to take data from the table to substantiate your answer. You have to quote evidence. So if you take a look at it, there is actually 2 trends. A lot of you are not able to describe these 2 trends, and a lot of you are very general in your answer. So let's take a look at what are the 2 trends before we craft our answer. So the first trend is that if you take a look over here, okay, as you go from 0 to 10 for your fertilizer, the growth rate is also increasing, right? If you take a look at it. So I'm just going to do 2 arrows this way to signify that they are of the same trend. So this is what you can do also. Okay, so as amount of fertilizer increases from 0 to 10, average surface area also increases. Okay, but there is a second trend. As you increase further from 10 to 20, what happens? It decreases. It's an opposing trend. So by annotating like that, it's very clear. So I have one trend here, and I have another trend here. 2 trends. Trend 1, trend 2. So you have to talk about these 2 trends. These are the 2 conclusions. And another factor is that students are not able to state whether is it above 15 or is it above 10. Okay, whereby it starts to drop. So in your answers, some of you would say things like, oh, anything that is 15 or more, okay, the fertilizers added, the plant rate growth will start to decrease. But is it really at 15? So how do you help yourself understand this? You can plot a very simple graph to help yourself make sense of this. So very quickly, I will just demo to you. So in exams, right, I will just draw something like that. Okay, measured variable more often than not is always on the left-hand side. So this is my measured variable. This is growth. Okay, and then this is actually amount of fertilizer. Something like that. And then I have 0 here. I have 5, 10, okay, 15, 20. And then very quickly, over here I have 20, 30, 36. Okay, 5, 10, 20, 40, and 50. So if I were to do a very simple plotting, I would know that at 0 it is at 20, at 5 it is at 30, at 10 it is at 36, at 15 is at 20, at 20 it is at 14, somewhere here. So if I were to draw the curve, can you see that anything that is over 10, be it here, 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 it starts to drop. Anything that is above 10, okay, growth rate starts to drop. So that's why it's more than 10 and not 15. So in exam, if you're given a table like that, you can just plot yourself a very simple graph and then that will clarify everything already. Okay, don't need to panic. Okay, so how would my answer look like? So as the amount of fertilizers increases from 0 to 10 gram. So make sure you have your units there and make sure you quote the data. The surface area of the leaves increases. Alright, that's the first conclusion. When more than 10 gram of fertilizers is used, the growth of leaves starts to decrease. So if you mention trend without stating the values, half mark. So half mark for stating the values together with the trend, okay, for each one. So therefore it's very important that you state, okay, and correct identification is 10 gram, not 15. Okay, and I show you how to do it already. I know it from the table it looks like, oh, only at 15 start to drop, so I should say 15. Okay. You don't have to be specific because from this graph, right, as long as it's above 10, do you realize as long as it's above 10, it can be 11, it can be 12, it can be anything, it starts to decrease already. So that's why the answer is more than 10 and not a specific number. That is a trend. You are describing a trend, but you're using numbers to justify it. Okay? Anyway, this is not necessary if you understand tables. But of course, you know, if exam you panic, this is one way that you can be very certain of what values to put. Okay? I'm just showing you, I'm just externalizing my thoughts to you and putting it down so that you can see it very clearly and you know how to tackle this kind of question without a doubt. Okay, moving on. Okay, explain why the results of Ravi's second experiment cannot be used to improve leaf growth in pot S from his first experiment. Actually, if you ask me, this question is kind of disguised a bit like an unfair test question, fair test question. But in this case, it's unfair comparison, isn't it? Because his second experiment, he actually uses garden soil for all. Whereas pot S, if you go back up, uses clayey soil. Okay, so because the results that he obtained uses garden soil, whatever that is being obtained may not apply to the clayey soil. So it's an unfair comparison. In a way, it's an unfair test, but it's not really an unfair test because these two were not conducted in the same experiment. It's just that he took the results from one experiment and he tried to apply the findings to another experiment or a different scenario. So it's an unfair comparison. Okay, so what would the answer be? Different types of soil were used. So different types of soil were used in experiment 1 and 2. Okay, so because of that, it's an unfair comparison. Alright, moving on. Okay, we are not going to do A, we are going to do B. Now this question was very, very poorly done. Very poorly done. Okay? Now let's go through this and then we see what do you think the question is asking for. The statements below describe the behaviors of organism X and Z, doesn't matter what they are. X eats the whole fruit of W but cannot digest the seeds. Okay? Then Z catches X and flies far away from W before eating it. Z eats only the flesh of X but leaves the internal organ behind. So let's try to make sense of this by doing a little bit of annotation, okay, and questioning. So I see the word seeds, I see the word far away. So what topic do you think this is? Probably, if you ask me, a good guess is on plant reproduction. That is the topic. And then after that, the concept tested would be what? Seed dispersal. So straight away, I know that under seed dispersal, okay, I need to mention that, okay, must be far away from parents, okay? And then on top of that, is to avoid overcrowding and competition for, competition for food. Then I'm thinking, why must compete for food? These are plants, you know. You look at your answers, you go, oh, avoid competition for food. But they're plants, they make their own, right? Okay, so to avoid overcrowding. So even without doing much analysis, just by annotating like that and trying to figure out what on earth is this question trying to ask me, I didn't know that in my answer statement, right, I must write disperse further from parents, avoid overcrowding. 1 mark in my pocket. And then after that, what about the other 1 more mark? Okay, so the other 1 more part, I must take hint that, okay, it cannot digest, so good, okay. And another thing about it is, what's with the internal stomach part? So you think about it, if it cannot be digested and it's inside the stomach, okay, and then it's left somewhere on the ground, right? Because this Z doesn't eat X, which has the W inside of X. Okay, so you think about it. So when that happens, right, Z is going to spit out or leave behind the stomach. Correct or not? So inside the stomach is the seed. So this one, right, has 2 ways of answering it. If you want to answer it using the food web way, you can say that when it decomposes, it provides nutrients, okay, or fertilizers for the plant to grow, correct? Because the seed is inside the stomach. So when the stomach decomposes, it provides nutrients for it to grow. That's one. The second way, okay, is to answer it from a point of plant repro. So one of it is, you know that seeds needs to germinate. So when the seed is left in the stomach with the right condition, it will germinate. Okay, so I need to talk about that. So cannot be digested. Eventually it should germinate. Okay, can you see how it's all related when you unpack it and annotate in that way? So how would my answer look like? Okay, so you have to say Z flies far away. Okay, W, to allow seeds to be dispersed. a lot of you never tell me disperse. You just went far away. But it's about seed dispersal, right? So I don't know why the keyword disperse is not there. Okay? Disperse widely or far away from the parents. Okay? The idea must be there. Disperse has to be there. This reduces overcrowding. Please don't tell me compete for food. It's a plant. It makes its own plant. Own food. Okay? So then you can say that seed is undigested in the stomach of X and will germinate under the right conditions. So what are the right conditions? I mean, if you're very good at it, okay, you can actually talk about wow, okay, WOW, okay. Okay, just in case y'all don't know what is WOW, I revise again. So W is water, oxygen, and warmth. Alright? Okay, so you have to say that it is undigested. Okay, so you use information here and then you apply it. So if you really want to see how is it being applied, okay, cannot digest comes under here. Flies away comes under here and disperse. Okay? This part is about being your stomach. Can? Okay, moving on. Okay, Mary has a pot of water with a layer of oil shown below. Based on what you observe, state a physical property of oil. So you can only say things that you observe because the question already say what you can observe from the diagram. It cannot be something that you read about somewhere but it cannot be seen. Okay, so for example, what higher freezing point, lower freezing point, don't know what, okay, cannot. You have to say something along the lines whereby oil floats on water. Okay, or oil has a lower density on water. It's fine. Okay, that's why it floats because you can see from there. Or oil does not mix with water. That is also something can be observed. You have to also tell me floats on water. Don't tell me oil floats. Floats on what? Some of you also say eat. Be specific. Now, next question is where I think all of you got this question wrong. Don't even have a single person that didn't get it wrong, correct. Okay, Mary put the pot in the refrigerator, which is at a temperature of 4 degrees Celsius. After a few hours, the oil froze and Mary removed it easily from the water. Okay, so the first question asks you, state what freezing means. So once again, as you can see, over the years, okay, the PSLE question, they always ask for definition question. And at least one. And definition question means there is no way around it. You have to give the exact definition. No second way around it. Okay? So the answer for this is freezing occurs when a substance changes from a liquid state to a solid state at a fixed temperature. Okay, a lot of you missed out the fixed temperature. That's actually very important. Now, what can you tell about the melting point of oil? Okay. Firstly, we have to annotate this a little bit, break it down to help you. Now, melting point, if you think about it, is also the freezing point. Okay, melting point is the same as freezing point. That is something that a lot of you didn't notice or didn't realize it. So that's why water's freezing point is 0, its melting point is also 0. Okay, so in the question they state here, Mary put a pot in the refrigerator which is at a temperature of 4 degrees Celsius. After a few hours, the oil froze. Okay, and Mary removed it easily from the water. Okay, so they asked about melting, not freezing. Now, first thing you must understand, because you put it in a temperature of 4 degrees Celsius, okay, at 4 degrees Celsius, because melting is the same as freezing, remember it says it got frozen. Okay, it got frozen at 4 degrees. It will also melt at 4 degrees. Agree? Because freezing equals to melting, man. So at 4 degrees, it will also melt. But wait, because it is actually about melting, if it can melt, if the lowest point that it will melt is at 4 degrees, then any temperature above it will also cause it to melt. Right? Because melting is about gaining heat, right? It's just like, you know, if I tell you you melt at 4 degrees, at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 degrees, you will also melt. So that's why the answer for this question, right, needs to be the melting point of oil is greater or equal to 4 degrees Celsius. Okay? It's not either one. The whole thing must be there. Now you can actually remove it easily without it melting into the water because it floats. It floats. Okay? It's less dense. Okay? Alright. Question 36. Okay. Question 36 tells you that it shows the front view of a toy ambulance. He set up an electric circuit in the toy using bulb P, a sound box, and batteries as shown in diagram 2. All circuit components are working. So straight off the top, you already identified in your mind that this is actually got to do with, okay, electricity. Now, the question then goes, when he closes the switch, the bulb does not light up. Okay, and there is no sound. Draw a circuit to correct the mistake. Okay, so what you want to do is to really take a look at the circuit to see what is wrong with the circuit diagram. So what you can do is, like I always say, when it comes to electric circuit, you need to trace. So starting from positive, remember it's always from positive to negative. So when you trace, you would realize, assuming the switch is closed, that first up, okay, It's both positive to positive, cannot be the case. So the first mistake is actually one of your battery needs to be inverted. Alright, because electric currents always flow from positive to negative. So as I'm doing one more time, can you see it's positive to positive? The second issue is that the bulb is connected incorrectly. So just a very quick recap, I'm going to quickly draw the bulb out for you. So the bulb actually looks like this, okay, when you uncover it. Okay, one of the wires run down to the tip and another runs to the side. So when you actually have this kind of bulb, this kind of drawing, you need to connect one wire to the side and one wire to the bottom. So therefore this is wrong as well. So you got two issues to rectify. So we can draw in the first rectification. Now, because they did not ask you to draw an electric circuit diagram, you do not use symbols. So symbols meaning this represents a bulb, this represents a battery. No, you follow exactly the electric diagram, you follow the circuit diagram which is given as shown. So as you can see, the batteries, right, they did not draw it using the symbolic form. So you shouldn't also. Similarly with the bulb, because you need to draw this kind of bulb in order to show the correct connection. So I'm going to draw it in for you. Now when drawing, it's very important, it's key to use pencil and a ruler where possible. Okay, it is also important to make sure that there are no gaps at all in a circuit diagram if you're asked to draw a circuit diagram that is workable. Of course, that is your switch will be an exceptional thing. Okay, so what you can do is you can start off by drawing your battery. Okay, now make sure your battery has no gap at the connect points as well. Okay, so the other battery is supposed to be inverted. Okay, make sure there's no gap. Alright, this will give you 1 mark. Now, then after that, you need to follow exactly how this is like. Okay, so what they did was that they then connected some wires from here to your sound box. Oh, but before that, there is actually a switch. Correct. Okay, there is a switch. My bad. Okay, so somewhere here you need to have a gap for your switch. Okay, maybe we will draw this a little shorter to make space for the switch. Okay, so this is your switch. And then this is connected to this side, like so. Okay, then you have your connection to your bulb. Now the connection to your bulb, remember, one must be to the side and another one must be from the bottom. Okay, so as much as possible, try to use straight lines and make sure there are no gaps, because any gap, it will not work. Okay, so when this is drawn, you will realize that, okay, now from positive, assuming that it's closed, your sound would work. Okay, your light bulb will also work, no issue. Okay, now when you have drawn this correctly, this is also worth 1 mark, and that is how you get your 2 marks over here. Any mistake will give you a subtraction of 1.5 mark. Okay, you do not need to close the switch because your aim is to draw a circuit to correct the mistake. Okay, it's understandable. Okay, the switch is there. Next, draw on your circuit in A to show how you will connect 2 bulbs, and these 2 bulbs, right, okay, is added. Now, when you close the switch, all 3 will light up without dimming bulb P. They didn't say about dimming the other 2. So the other 2 doesn't need to be same brightness as P. So they can be dimmer than P, okay, but the whole idea is P cannot be dimmed. And your P is this. So obviously we know that it needs to be arranged in a parallel arrangement to P. The bulbs needs to be in parallel arrangement to P. If you're going to write it out, if the question asks you to write it out, make sure you say that the additional bulbs are arranged parallel to P. Don't just put arranged in a parallel circuit. That does not make sense actually, because it can be parallel to so many things. It can be parallel to the batteries, parallel to the wires, okay, parallel to the sound box. Okay, so in this case, what you can do is you can actually add in the bulbs, okay, here. Make sure when you draw the bulbs, draw it exactly like how it's being shown. Okay, this is a bit too big. Let me just shrink it down a little bit. Something like this, okay? And what is important is you need to connect it at the sides. Remember I told you, okay, previously the same thing. Okay, the connection should be one at the side, okay, and then one at the bottom. So from here, you can connect to the side, and then you should come up from the bottom, go to the side, come up from the bottom, like this. Okay, of course you can use a ruler and straighten the wires, it's fine. So therefore this is parallel to this. Alright? Okay, moving on. It's fine. Okay. Moving on. Okay. Ziming set up an apparatus to investigate how his toy car can move on its own along the plastic track from A down to B, okay, before leaving at at D. Okay, C is at a fixed height above B. Now, when Ziming released the car at A, it moved past B but was not able to reach C. Explain why. Now, for this, you need to understand a few things, alright, which I'm going to spend some time to explain. Now, you know that ultimately, right, there is not enough kinetic energy for it to move up to C, alright? That's why maybe it moved up to here only. So, if you're going to tell me there is not enough kinetic energy or not enough GPE, because obviously not enough GPE means there's not enough GPE to be converted to KE. But ultimately, that is only worth half a mark. Because the actual understanding is you need to understand that some of this kinetic energy is being converted to heat and sound. So here's the thing, okay? I always explain to my students that it's like this. So from here, over at this point here, before you start, you have GPE, gravitational potential energy. And then when you let go of the car, okay, as it's moving downwards, you have kinetic energy. Now, the kinetic energy will be converted into heat, okay, and sound energy. Now, the reason why is it from kinetic energy and not for gravitational energy, as in these two, your sound and your heat, the source of origin, is because the sound and heat only happens if there is kinetic energy. You think about it. If let's just say your car wasn't moving at all, because the direct conversion is from GPE to KE. There will be no heat, because if it doesn't move, there's no opposing motion, therefore no friction. No friction, therefore no heat. And the sound as well, only when it moves. When it moves, okay, it's actually causing the sound to happen. And how come it moves? It's because there is KE, kinetic energy. So ultimately, this two comes from KE, and then KE comes from GPE. Okay, I think this part, you all need to really take some time to rewatch this video and try to understand why is it that the heat and sound doesn't come from GPE directly but from KE. Alright, so this is something you need to understand. So therefore, in your answer, you have to state that some of the KE, okay, is being converted to heat and sound. So because of that, there is not enough to reach C. So how would your answer look like? So your answer would look like some kinetic energy of the car has been converted to heat energy due to friction. When it moves from A to B. Right? Then in the next question, very importantly, without using different apparatus and additional materials, suggest two different ways to help the car reach C in this investigation. Explain your answer. Now, many of you said to make the loop smaller. Therefore, what you do is you bring C down. That is actually cheating, isn't it? Right? Then what's the point? They are not actually solving the problem. Rather, you are just you're just changing the whole experiment. In fact, they already tell you that C is at a fixed point, right? So the point is not to so-called play cheat and then bring this lower down, but rather how does it actually gain more KE, kinetic energy? Because don't forget, remember I always tell you, the first thing you do is always ask yourself, which chapter is this? What topic are they testing you on? So they're really testing you on energy and energy conversion. So you ask yourself, okay, in order to reach C, which energy must I have the most? And your answer naturally would be an increase in KE. So then you can backtrack. Where does my KE come from? Oh, it came from GPE. Okay, how do I increase GPE? Already the hint is here. Adjustable joint. You can actually bring up this clamp, okay, bring up point A. So you adjust point A higher, therefore there is more GPE to be converted to more KE, right? So that's the point, okay? That's the first answer. Then what's your second solution? Okay, so some of you actually say, oh, add a lubricant like oil. But the question already states, without using additional materials. So you cannot do that. Or you cannot say, oh, use a smoother track. So some of you was mentioning, or change the material of the track, but they say you cannot use a different apparatus. So because of that, all this is not correct. So instead, you can give it a push. By giving a push, okay, the car will actually have more KE. Once again, the key idea is how do you increase KE? So how would my answer look like? So the first one would be, okay, push the car harder to enable it to have higher kinetic energy. Right? Then it can reach point C. 2. Adjust A higher so that the car, so that the car will have more GPE. Please spell out in full. In exam, you cannot use the short form. I'm using it, okay, to save some time. It should be gravitational potential energy. So once again, because it's got more GPE, okay, more GPE can be converted to more KE, therefore it will reach point C. So state the main forms of energy that the car will have point C. So point C is up in the middle of the loop. So obviously there is a certain height from the ground. The first thing that you have is your gravitational potential energy. Now when it comes to this, can you all please highlight in your question stem to say that it's energy and not force. I have many people telling me gravitational force. That is actually a careless mistake. It's not that you don't know the GPE, but you got confused with force and energy. Okay, so in this case, this would be GPE. Okay, gravitational potential energy. And please learn how to spell. Okay, and kinetic energy, correct? Because the car is still moving. It's not stopping. At point C, it is still stopping. It is still moving. If it stops, it will just fall vertically down, which is not what is going to happen. Alright? Okay? Moving on. This question. Okay. So one look at it, you know it is a question on, it's got to do with magnets, obviously, the hint on it. Okay. Let's dive deeper in to see what exactly is happening. Okay. So Leela placed a magnet on top of a balance as shown in diagram 1. Okay. So you know what is happening. So when you read, that's how you will do. So I'll look for my magnet and then I'll also look for my diagram 1. Okay, then the question goes, she brought object A is here, highlight object A, close to the magnet as shown in diagram 2. Okay, state what object A is. Now, whenever you have an experiment and they show you two diagrams, before and after, you always compare. What you want to do is you always want to compare the two to see what is the difference. So obviously the difference in this case is actually the mass that is reflected on the weighing scale, on the balance, on the electronic balance. So this one has a plus 8 gram. That is the change. So what it means is that there is some amount of force that is being pushed onto this. Now be very careful. It doesn't mean that in diagram 1 there is no force. There is force, but if there's no force, then how is it that you even get your 60 gram? It's just that on your diagram 2, there is more force. And that's where later on, many of you will miss out this very important point when crafting your answer for a later question. You will see what I mean later. So state what object A is. So obviously, you think about it. If you need it to push down some more, definitely this object A has affected the magnet in a way that it causes it to go further down. So you think, what type of object could have an effect on magnet that is forcing it away from each other? And very, very clearly, that is actually got to do with the light poles of a magnet. So object A must be a magnet. Now then B says, explain why the reading of balance increased in diagram 2. Okay. So in this case, many of you're able to tell me that it's got to do with repulsion. It's got to do with repulsion. But you didn't tell me the light poles are facing each other. You have to tell me that the light poles are facing each other, so therefore it will repel. So if this is north, this will be north. Example. Okay, because if you don't say that the light poles are facing each other, you just tell me, oh, they will repel. My question is, this could be a south pole. No wrong. and then your answer would not be valid anymore. So a lot of you did not tell me that the light poles were facing each other. Now, because they are facing each other, obviously there's a repulsion. And then the 1 mark comes, okay, you need to tell me more force, okay, is being placed on the balance or being pushed onto the balance. More force is acting on the balance. The word more and the word force needs to be there. Because initially, like I told you, there's already a force. That's why you got 60 grams. Now it's more because of the repulsion. Okay, so how would the answer look like? Okay, the answer will look like this. Okay, the like poles of two magnets are facing each other. Causing repulsion between the two magnets that increases. So this is what I'm talking about. The force applied on the balance. Just in case you didn't know, this is called an electronic balance. If it's not electronic, it's called a beam balance. Now, then the next question states that Leela replaced object A with an iron bar of the same size in the setup of diagram 2. State which P, Q, R, S or T below is possible on the balance. So if you look at it, if you replace object A with an iron bar, okay, now first things first, because it's got to do with a question on magnets, when I see magnetic materials, I'm very sensitive to it. If you cannot remember, okay, COINS, that's the acronym for cobalt, iron, nickel, and steel. These are the 4 magnetic materials you need to remember. So iron is actually a magnetic material. So because it is a magnetic material, if you look at it, now if you replace it, okay, with a magnetic object, iron bar, it will be, your magnet will be attracted to it instead. So when it attracts the magnet, okay, less force is being applied onto the balance and it should be lighter. Okay, so therefore the only plausible one that is lighter, okay, than 60 grams, because initially it's already 60 grams. So therefore that's lighter than 60 grams is P. Okay, so how would your explanation look like? Okay, so the magnet attracted the iron bar, so it will exert a much lesser force on the balance. Okay. Now, by convention, we always say that it's the magnet that attracts the magnetic material, okay? Not the other way around. Now, state a variable that Leela must keep constant when comparing object A and the iron bar. Okay, for this question, right, they are actually asking you, it's sort of like disguised a little bit like a fair test. Now, here's the thing, you gave me answer like, oh, the stand must be of the same height. But it's not a good answer, because obviously if you're using the same stand, it will be the same height, correct? If you're using the same thing, you're just changing this. You're not changing this one, correct? This is not adjustable, okay? And then some of you say, oh, use the same size. But guess what? They told you it's the same size. So it has to be a variable that can be changed and will make significant difference to the experiment. So for example, the distance, okay, between the object A and your iron, this needs to be kept constant, right, over here. Because obviously if you put it closer, it may affect the magnetic force. So because of that, this is a relevant factor. Okay, so another one that you may want to consider, but it's not a very good answer either, okay, will be the mass of object A. You cannot say size because they need to tell you size is the same, correct? So state a variable that will include, okay, the distance between the iron bar and the magnet. Okay? So this is a much more relevant variable that you want to keep constant. Okay, moving on. A glass has thin wall and a thick bottom. State a physical property, okay, that the thick bottom glass that prevents it from breaking when placed on the table. So obviously we're looking at strength. This is actually very straightforward. They're not asking you to explain why having a thick bottom will prevent it from breaking easily. So some of you actually bothered to explain, but that's not the answer. The answer is just state a property. Now, next question. Two glasses A and B are stacked together as shown. They became stuck and Ahmad was unable to separate them with his hands. For safety reasons, Ahmad is not allowed to use lubricants on the glass and not to force the glass apart with his hands. Describe two ways that Ahmad can separate the glasses. You may use a diagram in your answer. So when you look at it, it's stuck, right? It's tight, right? So basically, you need to make B expand. Correct? You want to make the outer glass grow bigger, and you need to make glass A contract, become smaller. So expand become bigger, and contract become smaller. Okay? So how do you do this? So what you will do is, you will actually put ice, okay, or cold water inside glass A, and for glass B, you will submerge it in a very shallow basin of hot water. So it has to be shallow, so that only glass B touches it. Okay? I like how some of you actually said that, separate the glass, then put glass B into hot water and glass A into cold water. If you can separate it already, then why are you even doing this? You realize that, right? But that's what you all wrote, okay? Now, then they say you may use a diagram to draw in your answer. Here's the thing. Here's my take. You don't have to follow what I say. But this is what I generally feel. The more things you write unnecessarily, the additional things that the examiner has to fault you on. So if don't need, then don't draw. Because you could get the drawing wrong, but your explanation is correct. Then how? So the examiner will be very confused, right? You're causing unnecessary confusion. So don't draw where possible, because it's just an additional part for the examiner to mark you down. Okay? So therefore, what's the answer? So the first one is put only glass B, okay, in a shallow basin of water. 2, put ice into glass A. Okay, or cold water I will also accept. Explain why one of the way, okay, doesn't matter which one. But the whole idea is, you'll never tell me, okay, gain heat or lose heat? Okay, you never tell me gain heat or lose heat. So because of that, you lose marks. So let's say I want to talk about the glass B, because as long as glass B expands, right, actually I can pull out glass A already. It's just that I want to make it faster, so I contract glass A, expand glass B. Alright, so any one of it. Okay, so when glass B is in contact with hot water, it gains heat from it. Please tell me where is it? The it refers to the hot water and expands more than glass A. Okay? You have to put this statement there because don't forget, glass A is also in contact with glass B still. So heat will still ultimately be transferred to glass A. However, your glass B will get heated up first, so it will expand more because it's the one that is in direct with the heat source, which is your hot water in this case. So if I'm going to state the opposite, which is actually contraction, I would say glass A would have lost heat, okay, to the cold water or the ice and contract, okay, became smaller than glass B. Alright? Okay, now, very quickly, alright, so let's move on to question 40. So question 40 is a very commonly tested concept. In fact, you would have seen that in all 3 past year PSLE paper, we have talked about it. It is actually on water cycle. Okay, I stress again, it is a concept. Alright, the topic that they are testing you on would be water cycle. However, the difference is that nowadays it's not so simple as just showing you a picture of the sea and then asking you, oh, how do you obtain water from the sea, from the ocean? Okay, it's got to do with more real life application. So for example, in 2018, we saw the application of this water cycle when you talk about how a double window can actually help, retain heat. Okay, and then after that we talked about in this one 2019, which is the spectacles. Oh, sorry, in 2018 or other paper, I can't remember, we talked about how the mist was being formed, right? So the mist whereby the ice was taken out of the vent, okay? How the mist was being formed in the air. That was water cycle. And then in 2019, which is this paper, we talked about how the fog is being formed on the glasses, also water cycle. And then in 2020 paper, which you have done, is actually on the question on the sausages. Okay? Alright, so how did the ice form? Alright, where did the water come from? So that is actually water cycle. So all in all, water cycle has been tested in every single paper, just that it appears in different forms of application. Okay? So let's take a look. Alice and Beatrice were traveling in an air-conditioned car. Both were wearing the same type of spectacles. Alice put her hand over her spectacles, but Beatrice did not. When they stepped out of the car, there was less fogging on Alice's spectacles than Beatrice's, as shown. So, right off the top, we have to do a little bit of annotation. First things first, ask yourself, what topic is this on? This topic is on water cycle, which we've talked about. Now, air-conditioned car tells you that the temperature, initial temperature of the surrounding is actually pretty low. So because it's pretty low, and your spectacles, I assume, should be made up of glass as well as metal. So when you think about it, your spectacles, technically speaking, would have actually lost heat to the surrounding cooler environment. And when that happened, it should drop in temperature for your spectacles. Okay? However, take a look. What does it tell you? Alice put her hands over her spectacles. So this tells you that because Alice's hand, okay, body temperature is about 37 degrees, thereabout, is definitely higher than your air-conditioned car internal temperature. Normally, you will set your temperature to probably about 18 to 20 degrees Celsius, thereabout. Whatever it is still going to be lower than your body temperature of 37 degrees. So, assuming that your glasses actually became a lower temperature, okay, like so for Beatrice. However, in the case for Alice, that was not the case, because the heat from her hands would actually travel to the cooler spectacles, causing it to increase in temperature. Okay, that's the first thing we need to understand. And then the second part of the question tells you when they stepped out of the car, okay, there was less fogging. Now, think about it. Out of the car means you're outside the surrounding already. Now, the surrounding temperature, let's just say we're talking about Singapore, would be probably about 30 degrees. I would think so. Okay, so that is significantly higher than what your spectacles would be, because it would have lost heat, okay, to the surrounding cooler temperature. Okay, I'm talking about if let's just say you never use your hand to cover. Okay, now then they told you that there is less fogging, okay, on Alice's spectacles. What is this fogging? Now, this fogging is actually water. If you think about it, it's actually water droplets. So you ask yourself, where did these water droplets come from? How was it formed? So it actually came from, okay, your condensation of water vapor. So be very careful. A lot of you actually did not tell me that it's water vapor. You tell me it's air. Okay? Air has so many types of gases. There is oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, helium, argon. Okay? So what exactly are you talking about? Not all of them can condense and become water droplets. It is actually the water vapor that I'm concerned with. Now, then you also have to ask yourself, okay, since you know that it's condensation, how come Beatrice has more condensation compared to Alice? So in short, right, what they are testing you for, the concept, is actually factors affecting rate of condensation, right? And when you think about this two, the change variable of this two between Alice and Beatrice is actually the temperature of their spectacles. Now, in Alice, your temperature of your spectacle will actually be higher as compared to Beatrice's. Now, the reason is because, like I told you earlier, Alice was covering, okay, her spectacles with her hands. So when she covered with her hands, heat from her hand, which is of a higher temperature, would have traveled to her glasses, making the temperature higher, okay, as compared to Beatrice, which didn't, okay, because the spectacles would have lost heat to the internal cooler surrounding of the aircon. Now, this is very important. Then, for me to explain to you the complete story, we also have to understand this. Heat always travels from a region of higher temperature to a region of lower temperature. So if the temperature between the two regions, okay, is greater, then the rate of heat transfer will also be greater. So for example, if I have one region that is at 100 degrees Celsius, okay, touching another contact surface, another region of, let's just say, 10 degrees, the difference between this is actually 90 degrees. So can you imagine the difference is very great? Heat will actually be lost, okay, from region A to region B at a faster rate compared to the second scenario, whereby if let's just say region A was about 100 degrees and region B was about 90 degrees Celsius. So yes, your heat will still travel from A to B, but at a much slower rate because the difference is only 10 degrees Celsius. And that is what is happening over here. For Alice, okay, which is A, the temperature difference wasn't very great. It was something like this. So maybe say, assuming that the temperature of her spectacles, okay, was probably maybe about 24 degrees and the surrounding was 30 degrees. So the temperature difference was only about 4 degrees Celsius. As compared to maybe say Beatrice's, the temperature of her spectacles could be maybe 18 degrees and then the surrounding was 30 degrees. So because of that, the difference was actually a good 12 degrees. So heat will definitely be lost to the spectacles, okay, from your water vapor at a faster rate. Okay? So basically, what we need to see, what we want to see is that you're able to actually highlight this difference. So how would your answer look like if I were to pen it down? So you would say that the spectacles, okay, or rather, sorry, let me just rephrase this. Alice's spectacles. Okay, I'm going to use specs for short, but in exam, please spell out the full word, okay? Specs gain heat from her hands and became warmer. Then Beatrice's specs. So always compare. What are you comparing? Use superlative term. And once again, if it's gain heat, you must tell me gain heat from where. Okay? So then this, okay, what happens? This resulted in sorry, let me just change this. This reduce the rate of heat loss by the surrounding water vapor to Alice's specs, which resulted in less condensation to water droplets. And it's good to actually put a bracket fog so that the examiner knows that you know that the fog actually refers to the water vapor in this case. The fog refers to the water droplets in this case. Okay? So for the next question, they say, explain why their spectacles became clear again after some time. So that means why was it not clear in the first place? So it was not clear because it was obstructed by the water vapor, water droplets, the fog. So that means you need to get rid of water droplets, right, when you think about it. So one way of getting rid of water, liquid water, is to evaporate it. So most of you are able to tell me, oh, it evaporated. But what you didn't tell me is, where did the heat come from? Remember, in evaporation, you always need to tell me that it is a heat gained by the water. But from where? Okay, so you have to say, the fog, bracket, water droplets, gain heat from the warmer surrounding and evaporated. Alright, so once again, something that's very fundamental but many of you didn't get it. Okay, one more very important point that I wish to caution is, whenever you attempt this kind of condensation question, water cycle question, okay, you must, I'm going to write this in a very colorful statement because it is very important. You must identify two things. Identify, okay, the cooler surface. That's one thing. And the next thing that you must identify, where is the source of your water vapor? Okay, this is very important. Okay, is it in the surrounding air? Okay, was it from a pot of water that got evaporated and then you get your water vapor from there? Make sure, okay, so this is going to be highlighted in multicolor because this is the part that many students cannot get, okay, and once you get this part wrong, that's it. You have a very hard time trying to answer this question.